I'm talking to myself about things like whether I still have this label. And right now, I'm not going to be too quick to throw it away because everything's the same in a way. I'm just managing, and I don't like the word manage, but managing things in a different way than I've been told. I've been told to manage with medication, and I'm managing with micronutrients. And it's been 3 days with no meds, and so far so good. Hopefully these days will continue, and I will just take micronutrients perhaps for the rest of my life. Imagine if I was told when I was taken to the hospital, you have this mental illness called bipolar disorder, but you're going to have to take these micronutrients, these vitamins, for the rest of your life. I think I would have been okay with that. But to be told I need to take toxic drugs with a lot of side effects for the rest of my life, and acting like that is guarantee of a good life, when it's not. A lot of people have trouble with medications or need to change a million times. And a million is a bit of an exaggeration, but the suffering of that can be astronomical. So we'll see how long this lasts. And again, I'm talking way ahead of myself. I'm talking like this is going to keep going like this, and I won't have to revert back to the mental health system's theories and talking points of you have to take this for the rest of your life and all that with medication. And I think that could be the power of positive thinking, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm just talking to myself and coming up with it mostly in the moment. So it's positive dialogue in a way, maybe. It's having dialogue in a way that moves consciousness towards that which one is having a dialogue about. And that could be the power of self-dialogue, is to reaffirm the context through which one wants to live one's life. And I would like to live my life in the context of not being medicated. And my main reason for that is that I would like my 25 years back. I don't want to die 25 years early due to all the compounding effects of taking these toxic chemicals. Lithium's very hard on the kidneys. I'm hoping that my kidneys are enjoying the last 3 days of regeneration. And even if I'm not able to stay off medication forever, if I get thrown back in that system by my family or my friends because I can't see myself doing it myself, if it's outside my own volition and I get thrown back into it and medicated, then at least I gave my body a break for some period of time, and know that it is possible to be off medication even if it's for a short period of time. Imagine if people could manage with something like micronutrients and then take meds only when very necessary. If more stress comes up or more trauma happens and they're needed temporarily, sure. But to say that one needs them every day, there's a lot of studies out there that says medications are helpful for 2 weeks max. And after that, in the long term, people who don't take medications actually do better in every factor and area of life. And the crappy thing is that once a person has been convinced they need these meds, after 2 weeks, they're probably stuck on them forever. So even if they might feel like they don't need them, when they try to come off, they'll feel like they might need them because they'll feel worse than ever. So I don't necessarily think the micronutrients are a cure for bipolar. The people at Hardy Nutritional says it's not a cure. So I'm not saying that I'm cured. I'm saying that I'm using something else to support myself. Micronutrients instead of toxic drugs. And it doesn't mean that my brain doesn't have the same propensities or dispositions or worldviews or perceptual capacities. I'm just choosing to manage it in a different way, and that should be my choice. And I don't give my consent to being medicated for more than 2 weeks. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So there's got to be another way. And I found another way, at least for now, and I wonder if I will be supported if I share not just supported in the system, but supported with how people feel. And I don't even think they'll be able to, because they'll just react immediately and think, this person has a mental illness, they must be on drugs, because we've all been brainwashed, whether we're on the drugs and labeled or not. Our family members can make it worse by thinking that that's what we need forever, because that's what makes them feel safe. Because even if something does go wrong, they can just pass us back over to the mental health system and they'll fix it. Even if what the mental health system does to us is causing a lot of it in the first place. And I wonder why this is a scary thing, why it's a scary thing to have come off the meds and feel like this should be a celebration. People should be thrown a trance and dance. One has transcended, and where's the party? But at the same time, I feel like right now I will keep the celebration private, and I will celebrate each day that I'm not on medication, because it's not a guarantee that I'll be able to keep this up. And I'm wondering what factors will be in the way of whether or not I am able to keep this up. And that is part of this discovery phase, is really discovering what I need to remove from my life to be able to continue to not take meds. Because I'd rather remove 90% of the things and people from my life and not take meds than take meds to remain in an insane society and what my nervous system finds to be inane in its new sensitivity without medication. So if my nervous system is telling me this isn't right for me, I could take a pill and move further into it, or I could just say, peace out, sayonara, I don't need this. So I will for now have my own trance and dance, and who cares if no one ever knows? I guess the real gap is being aware of what I need to remove. So if there's somebody around me that's kind of bugging me and I'm sensitive to it, and they know about my diagnosis and things, if I remain around them, I might start acting upset and angry, and then they'll be thinking, ooh. And even if they don't know that I'm no longer on meds, I know. And so I might feel like I can't be around this person because I'm too sensitive to certain things, and I don't even exactly know what they are, perhaps. But moving away from that might save me from building up an allostatic load of stress. Building up that allostatic load, and hopefully I can go back to some of the terminology that I learned from other people, such as Dr. Daniel Siegel and others, as well as some of the terminology and language I created with myself. I did that in order to move myself out of the trance, and can I do that to continue to move myself further away? And the further away I move, does that protect me? If I keep the mental health system close in some way, does that actually hinder the progress and the process? I really don't know, and that's yet to be seen. And when I go back home, will I continue to work a little bit in mental health, and will that actually be a bad decision? It could be. So it's interesting to have so much support and cheer and things when I share my story while I'm taking meds. And now that I'm not taking them, feel like I'm kind of alone. The one thing with having a mental illness diagnosis, even if one experiences some stigma or not, there's still a lot of people who are paid to smile and nod and say, you're doing the right thing, you're taking your meds, oh, you had a relapse, and oh, you got sick, and all these things, and sort of pat us on the back along the way. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's a whole system designed to keep us thinking that medications are good. And if we do take them, then we get all these good services and support. But by not taking the meds, we're almost saying, I'm not mentally ill, or whatever, and then one doesn't get any support. So the supports come with medication. Medication gets one support, and at the same time, they can cause a bunch of stuff that might actually lead to stigma because of how We can't think straight half the time. We can't see straight. We can't read. We're shaking. We can't do the same quality of motor skills because we're drugged. And then it's hard to be employed and all these things. And, oh, don't stigmatize, they have a mental illness, when a lot of those factors that actually get stigmatized are because of the drugs, not this supposed mental illness. So no wonder they invest a lot in these anti-stigma campaigns, because they're basically saying don't stigmatize the side effects of our medication, not don't stigmatize the mental illness, because almost everybody that has a diagnosis of a mental illness is on the meds. And all of the things that are side effects and are manifestations of being on the meds, not just having this so-called mental illness, but being on the meds always come with the mental illness label. That's what they're saying, don't stigmatize. Because after being medicated for 2 weeks, it's hard to get off the meds. It's hard when you're on the meds. It's hard to be on the meds. It's hard to increase the meds. It's hard to decrease the meds. Everything about the meds is difficult. And that difficulty is what manifests in all these difficulties. And then that's what we're saying, don't stigmatize us for. So I think most of the stigma is actually, if there's an appearance of something, it's side effects of medication, and they're saying don't stigmatize that. So I don't know, that's kind of a weird view of it, but we'll see how that unfolds. So when I took the meds, there's a whole system there to support me. Now that I'm not taking them, there's probably nothing. So even though I disagreed with being labeled with a mental illness, or saying, oh, you have a mental illness, being labeled with one and believing it and owning it is different than being labeled with one and not actually seeing that way, but still taking the treatments and then moving through the treatments and away from them because of the disagreement with that. And even if I was to say I do have a mental illness, and maybe I'll say that one day, I don't know. Maybe I do, but at the same time, I know there's a million ways to support and manage and move through anything. So to say that one has a certain manifestation in one's life and there's only one way to deal with it is just wrong, no matter what it is, whether it's cancer, mental illness, problems in relationship, problems at work. There's not just one way to move with something and support something. It's just not that way. And I don't agree with toxic medications for all of life. It takes away from the quality of life. And I don't think that's something I talked about yet when I've been talking about how it takes 25 years from one's life. Not only does it do that, whatever years one has remaining after a diagnosis and being put on drugs, they suck. And not totally and not always, but a lot of us end up in our parents' basement room and eating food and watching TV, and that's a manifestation of taking the drugs, not the mental illness, if there is one. So it decreases quality of life. It doesn't just increase mortality, it increases morbidity. It makes our life more morbid. It makes it less enjoyable. It's not just about the years left in your life, it's the life left in your years. And I didn't make up that statement, but that's also what it comes down to when taking these meds. It's not just I want my 25 years back. I want my 25 years that I have left before that last 25 years starts ticking. I want the whole 50 years to be a lot better. If I was to be on the 800 milligrams a day of Seroquel or something that doctor wanted to put me on a year ago, I'd probably be 250 pounds right now and be barely able to move, barely able to speak, flat affect. It would have been a disaster. But since I know it wasn't right for me, I went on the hard and scary journey to where I'm at now. So there's lots to that, and I'm wondering if my brain needs to get used to some of these non-dual experiences and consciousness, and whether it's good to integrate some spiritual language, actually do some reading in order to move into a context of maybe spiritual interpretation in case something else does happen. a lot of people who go through crisis of this kind in shamanistic cultures, they get initiated as a shaman. And that doesn't mean that butterflies start flying out of their ears and everything's peachy from that moment on. From what I've heard, it's quite the tedious process and very difficult. And so is this process perhaps to move through some of these experiences after coming off meds, and maybe there'll be more experiences that move towards me that I actually need to process. And that process could be reinitiated of beginning to process some of those processes. And I really don't know. And will I revert to a fear mentality, or will I be able to be with some of those energies? And I've talked about how it seems like some people get sensitive to way more energy than just beyond what we're usually used to. And the translation of that through the body in everyday life can be a bit chaotic and can manifest in very chaotic ways, and it can be difficult. So maybe those difficulties will come back more. I don't know. And do I need to maybe read Stan Grof's book, The Stormy Search for the Self? I did read some of that before. Do I need to go back to some of that too? A lot of the language that some people have been through these crises and moved through it in a spiritual context have done. My context with myself has been more around moving out of the mental health language and creating my own language. But at this point, would it be helpful to move into some of the language that people created? And I did read a little bit of that years ago, but through this process, I've been mainly focused on just the dialogue with myself and what that creates. But would it be a good safety net to really get with some of the other stuff that people have said? And Sean Blackwell has created that great series, Bipolar or Waking Up. And I remember watching that again, perhaps earlier this year or later last year, and thinking, wow, I resonate with everything he's saying. So can I remind my nervous system of those, so then it can be called upon in those moments? Can those associations happen in those moments where I need something to associate with in order to save me from the associations of mental illness and the mental health system? And we're so programmed to believe in all those things, even if we've never been labeled that. If something did happen, we might think, oh my God, I'm going crazy. This must be a mental illness. When if we only had this other, say, spiritual context, if those things happened, we would think something spiritual was happening. And that's one of the reasons why in the beginning I never thought, oh, I have a mental illness. I thought spiritual things were happening because I was reading spiritual stuff. Or could spiritual stuff, the reading of spiritual stuff, actually provoke some more of these experiences? And maybe I just want to stay somewhat grounded and not invite that back. And I think part of this process has shown me that it's difficult to actually read things that are out of place in the moment. Reading a book written by somebody else 20 years ago on their experience 30 years before that. So it's really moving consciousness away from the present moment. And that's why I like self-dialogue, and it could be important for people with this bipolar disposition, or whatever you want to call it, to remain in the moment as much as possible, because we have access to so much more information that if we really get with the moment, we can harvest the information from the moment by having an insight into something, writing it down and extrapolating that, instead of looking at other people's insights and then getting the brain all confused and being able to see other people's insights from other places in time, which can kind of transport the brain to other places in time and get it a little bit confused about where it is and what it's all about. And so yeah, it could be important to just stay mostly with my own dialogue, at least for now, because other things really stretch the brain. It's again, I think I was talking about how so-called brains in regular consciousness are anxious to gather all the bandwidth, whereas if I look at something that somebody wrote that was kind of genius, 30 years ago, it puts my brain into an extrapolation that can see way more bandwidth with just seeing a little bit of somebody else's information. So it's this reverse filtering process. If I have a regular consciousness brain, I might read a book and glean a number of interesting tidbits and kind of file them away in my brain. But if I have a reverse bandwidth brain, it actually creates a lot of bandwidth from reading a little bit of bandwidth, instead of reading a lot of bandwidth and retaining a small amount of bandwidth. So knowing that, it's sort of important to be kind of a creator and not just a consumer and reinterpreter and mixing around a little bit of what other people said and taking it on one's own. So it seems that I have bandwidth anxiety in a different way. It's keep the bandwidth away from me, because that will just make my brain see way too much, way too quickly. And it creates its own bandwidth related to that, because it can really see what the other person is saying. And when it can really see that, it can see much more beyond that. Instead of just saying yes and no to what somebody's saying, really seeing it. Whether not just saying, oh, I agree with that statement, I disagree with that statement, I agree with that statement, I don't like that statement, that doesn't make sense, that makes sense. Really, really seeing it's a totally different dimension. So back to what Carrie Fisher's brother said about seeking treatment for children and children seeking treatment, and it's a message for children, and how treatments do work, and they kill you 25 years earlier. They do work at that too. And they make you fat and not able to have sex and not able to enjoy anything and barely able to speak. So I don't know if that's worth it. And I was thinking about the language of psychiatric survivor, and I don't know if I resonate with that. I think I resonate more with my own term of trans-ended. And the thing is that we really have to work to end our own trance. Nobody's going to do it for us. Every other element in the whole system is working to maintain that trance. The way the workers are trained, the way the psychiatrists are trained, the pharmacists are trained, the pharmaceutical techs are trained, the police are trained, the psych nurses are trained, the mental health workers, the social workers, everybody is trained to see us in this way and talk to us in this way and make us believe in this way, because they believe in this way, even though if they were to go through it, they probably wouldn't want to believe in this way, though a lot of them do end up going through it, because a lot of percentage of people eventually do, and maybe actually do believe it because that's the way they were trained. I really don't know. And I'm reading that book by Dr. Mercola, Fat for Fuel, and he said, as the body becomes more adept at burning fat for fuel, basically talking about how we can allow the body to adapt to burning fat for fuel if we eat mostly fat. But it made me realize that we can make certain aspects of our being more adept at certain things. So can we make perception more adept at burning beauty for fuel instead of conflict? Because the ego is conflict, and we're always in conflict in terms of wanting more, or something else, or better, or different. And this is a conflict. It's a conflict with the present moment. It's a conflict between what is and what should be. And that's something Krishnamurti would say. And so the body is very adept at moving in reality based on having these conflicts of wanting something else psychologically than what the moment seems to be providing. But when we can get with what the moment seems to be providing and see that instead of what it seems to be not providing, which is a very small something, and there's this immensity, this vastness that it is providing that we're not able to meet. And can we become more adept at meeting that? can we be more adept at perceiving beauty and allowing perception to burn the fuel of beauty instead of having these tweaks of energy through the conflict that we're experiencing. We're always moving in this contradiction. So can perception become more adept at perceiving beauty and moving in the field of beauty, as opposed to moving in the field of conflict with our thoughts? And that conflict with our thoughts preventing perception from seeing and moving with beauty. Can our eyes move from beauty to beauty to beauty, instead of having them stuck straight ahead and internal conflict and kind of looking but not really looking, how we can look but blur our eyes like we're looking but not? And I found some conversations I had with myself after I got out of the psych ward. I might have still been in the step down facility when I was having these conversations. And I haven't listened to them yet, but I might listen to them and edit them and add them into the mix somewhere. And I might also read my Emerging Proud blog story and a couple other things I wrote at different times. Mainly just to share some other perspective of what I might write about some of this stuff, and kind of to make some of this more complete, and also just share those views. And I've heard them echoed in other people and in advocates and what they say, and I feel like by voicing them, it might resonate with something deep in one's neurology and being that actually allows one's true voice about how one feels about things to come through, instead of just sort of this translated voice of smiling and nodding one's way through the mental health system. Because so many of these things are not okay, but we allow them to go on because we kind of have to. Because if we speak up, a lot of times it's just a sign of our mental illness. And I don't want to keep fighting the system, and I haven't really been fighting the system, but these few things that I've written are sort of a little bit more harsh and to the point about how I've seen things, and then that way I can just have it on a video and let it go and not feel like I have to revisit that. It's energy put on a video that can then be seen by whoever might happen upon it, and maybe if people happen upon it, they're meant to happen upon it, and instead of actually going out there in a contrived way. This conversation with myself is partly contrived, but at the same time it's mostly natural, and just adding those last bits that I would no longer wish to continue to say might be good to put it away, instead of thinking that it's something I have to keep in mind. The things I talk about with myself, I want to be able to just drop and never say again. That's part of the reason for recording it. So I don't have to go around trying to initiate this conversation with every person I meet. I can just talk to myself and put it out there maybe, and then be done with it. I don't want to talk about this stuff for the rest of my life. But that's what often happens to us as advocates, and maybe part of this self-dialogue process could be healing in that one can say everything one wants to say to oneself about whatever, and then just put it out there or not, and just let it go, and not turn into lifelong advocates fighting this huge giant that will never be squashed by fighting them. It'll be squashed by moving on and almost just flicking it off one's shoulder like a mosquito that has no power, and moving on with one's life and not even giving any kind of energy to it anymore. And I don't know if that's true, I'm just making that up right now, but that's kind of part of talking oneself out of it, is just to be out of it, and use the process of talking oneself out of it to actually be the agent of continuing to participate in change without actually having to continue to participate in change. So by talking myself through this process, I can perhaps share it, and that may continue to help me participate in change without ever having to try to work on participating change in the mental health system ever again. Because it could be that if I even dip my toe in it, it could invite me back into having to be receiving services involuntarily in some way from that system. So I'm seeing now that this is part of the design of it, is to really have this as the final say about it and the final word, not having to actually be involved in it. It's sort of mental health advocacy by proxy. It is being an advocate without being an advocate. It's doing all the advocacy as one is in the process of talking oneself out of the system in order to just shake off that last little bit of it and say goodbye to it and not participate anymore and just have it as videos, because even looking at that again could be dangerous, because it's a very dangerous system. It's very powerful energetically. It's like this vortex that can suck anybody into it. And maybe these conversations will keep going on, and maybe I will keep talking to myself and just eventually not talk about mental health. Or maybe one day I'll just stop deciding to talk about mental health altogether, or talk to myself altogether, and maybe I won't talk to anyone in person about this. Maybe I'll just refuse. It's not part of my life. Or maybe this will invite conversation and I'll continue to talk in some kind of way. And who knows what's going to happen. And it looks like after this I have some extrapolations that were from the few days before I finished coming off the meds, and I'll go through those and then maybe read some of that other stuff and just continue to talk to myself about being off meds and what that means moving forward. And some of the extrapolations I wrote: life can create words, but words cannot create life. And it seems like we're lost in words. And in this process, it feels like this being in consciousness is more in contact with life. And life can create words by being in contact with life. But usually we're just in contact with words, creating more words about words. And it's not really life in that moment, creating words. So can we reverse that process? Can we see that words do not create life? They do not create meaning. Life creates meaning, and life might create meaningful words. But words without connection to life have no meaning, even if they sound meaningful. So can we shed old meanings to be in contact with the meanings of the moment? And in the process, at first, old meanings are mixed in, and words creating life, or words creating the experience of life, is mixed in, and it can be confusing and scary. If life is creating something, but words come in and try and say what that is and what it means according to past experience or what we've seen in the movies or something else, then it can be scary. But without that interpretation, it could be something altogether different. And can we witness the meanings? Can we witness that energy of life instead of being in and enacting old programs of words being superimposed over life? Words meeting life, and those words meeting life creates the way we act. Whereas life meeting the life of our being can create our words and the way we act, and it's completely different because it's meeting the life of the moment. The moment is life. The moment is all of life. There is no past or future, and this moment right now contains all of life. Yet we're meeting it with this tiny fragment of words that we've picked up like a fishnet accumulating garbage as it's dragged along the sea floor. And I remember meeting someone who went to Byron Katie's workshop on the work, and I don't know much about her, so I really can't comment, but he was explaining a process where if you have a thought, you constantly tell yourself or ask yourself, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? So if I think I am an angry person, I would think, is it true? Is it true? Well, I would think instead to myself, perhaps, does it mean anything? Who cares if it's true or not? Does it really mean anything? If it's completely meaningless, even if it is true or false, then maybe it can just be dropped. And maybe ask, is it related to the moment? So if I'm thinking about a memory 10 years ago and I'm thinking whether or not it's true, well, it could be true. Or maybe I'm supposed to tell myself it's not, but maybe I'm supposed to question whether it is or not by asking myself, is it true? But if it has nothing to do with the moment, then in a way it's not true, because it's not true right now. And if it has nothing to do with the moment, even if it is true in terms of the progression of time in one's life experience, it has nothing to do with the moment, so it's irrelevant. And it's more about, is the moment creating words, or are words creating the moment? Or are words distorting the moment? Or are words moving us somewhere other than the moment? Are words containing the moment? The moment can contain words, it can create words, or words can actually contain or limit the moment. And she talks about doing the work. And again, I don't know much about her, so I can't comment, but more of what I hear, it prompts me to think of certain extrapolations that don't necessarily have anything to do with the essence of what someone else is doing. So it's not commenting on that or whether it's valuable or not. It's just my brain gets activated in this interesting way that makes me actually interested in the languaging that people use. And to me, it's not that we do the work, but we are work itself. And work is, in a way, is action. It's force times distance in physics, and force is mass times acceleration. So it's moving a mass a certain distance. And each moment we're sort of moving the mass of our body a certain distance. So can we be the work? Can we be the work of the universe instead of just this little mechanism of the ego? Can we be action? Until next time, see for yourself.